For more on the politics of this, let's turn to our own Howard Fineman, senior Washington correspondent for Newsweek magazine, who mentions periodically here that he started his career in Kentucky. Howard, good evening.
Hi, Keith.
Rand Paul is blaming us for misunderstanding him when he said private businesses should be allowed to discriminate. When someone's running to be a federal legislator, does the media have the right to question him about his views on the role of the federal government, especially when it turns out he wrote letters to the editor that line up nicely with what he said last night, but the letter was in 2002?
Well, of course. That's why I was talking to my old colleagues at the Courier-Journal in Louisville, where I started out. They had an op-ed page board meeting there in April, and they asked him all these questions. And sure, they had a right to do it, and they did do it. And, you know, the interesting thing is that they published the answers, and they based their editorial in the Courier-Journal not endorsing either candidate in the Republican primary based on those answers. The interesting thing is that even Mitch McConnell's endorsed candidate, Trey Grayson, as far as I know, didn't make an issue of those comments. In other words, it wasn't a factor in the Republican primary in Kentucky. But I think the Courier-Journal and other people were right to ask about it. By the way, don't forget that Rand Paul basically announced his candidacy on Rachel's show a year ago. So it was fine for him then. It's not fine for him now.
Yeah, I guess that was a red herring, too. So the comments were made on that show to NPR, to two Kentucky newspapers. He's now gotten the Civil Rights Act involved, the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, too. We haven't mentioned that. He said he still disagreed with that on CNN tonight. He doubled down on that. He had a spokesman who had to resign in December because of the heavy metal band that he belonged to that dressed up in outfits that referenced the Ku Klux Klan. Is the sum total of everything here so potentially damaging? Because it doesn't seem like it's like these are the proverbial collection of isolated incidents here.
Well, it's always interesting, as the Sherlock Holmes used to write about, the dogs that don't bark.
Yeah.
I'm waiting to hear from Karl Rove on this one. I haven't heard him rush to the microphone to defend Rand Paul. That should tell you a lot. I think I called the RNC today. Michael Steele, the head of the RNC, he didn't really know much about it because he was traveling in Tampa, Florida. Tampa apparently not, being penetrated by the national media. The Republicans are hunkered down because they know that watching this guy cling to the last vestige of libertarianism on the Civil Rights Act is something that is not good for the Republican Party. Wolf Blitzer sort of backed him into the corner, but not fully, because as you did in your soundbite there, Rand Paul is still saying that the Civil Rights Act and its public accommodation stuff was necessary for the South in the 60s. Does that mean he doesn't think it's necessary now in the whole country? That question's still out there. The Republicans don't like that question being out there.
Does this, certainly as this is the start of his campaign and his national stage, does it put Rand Paul's candidacy in jeopardy? Is he not going to be on the ballot in November?
Well, interestingly, I talked to a top Republican staffer. I said, what about it? Is he going to stay on the ballot? This was about an hour ago. The guy said, well, he can always resign. But there's a, quote, unity rally that's to take place in Frankfort, Kentucky this Saturday, which will be one of the more amusing events in recent Kentucky political history, which is going to be Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell, who tried to defeat him. And again, in fairness to Mitch, this is a guy who worked for John Sherman Cooper, who was a key vote in the old Republican moderate coalition for the Civil Rights Bill in 1964. Now, McConnell's being careful, too, because even though Jeff Sessions of Alabama and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina have both said that Rand Paul is wrong on the law about public accommodations, McConnell's been a little more careful and circumspect because he's got to go to that unity rally on Saturday. I got to say that I'm not convinced that this controversy will kill Rand Paul in Kentucky. There's a small African-American vote there, unlike, say, Alabama Sessions and South Carolina Graham.
Last point, does this controversy do anything to this read of Tuesday's vote that there was Tea Party ascendancy, or these two things remain separate?
Well, now what it shows you, Keith, is the Tea Party giveth and the Tea Party taketh away. It can help at the grassroots and energize the Republican grassroots, but especially in states with big Hispanic or African-American populations or, quote, liberal populations in the cities, in Senate races like Pennsylvania or other state races in like Ohio or Illinois or whatever. This could be poison for the Republican Party if Rand Paul becomes the emblem of the GOP, which is, of course, what the Democrats are trying to do right now.
Howard Fineman of Newsweek and MSNBC, and member of the vast Kentucky Political Reporters Alumni Association.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Thank you, Howard.